Hi, automotive enthusiasts. Welcome to Cam and Crank, where today we're diving into the story of one of the most controversial motorcycles ever built, the 1999 Suzuki Hayabusa. This wasn't just another fast bike. It was a machine that completely rewrote the limits of speed, engineering, and cultural impact at the turn of the millennium. The Hayabusa appeared seemingly out of nowhere and instantly shattered records, becoming the first production motorcycle to approach the unthinkable figure of 200 miles per hour. To some, it was a marvel of Japanese innovation, a symbol of how far engineering could be pushed in pursuit of performance. To others, it was a menace, a motorcycle so powerful that it ignited fear in governments, regulators, and even the broader motorcycle industry itself. That tension between glory and danger, freedom and restriction, forms the heart of the Hayabusa's legacy. In this video, we'll explore not only how the Hayabusa came to be, but also why its existence shook the foundations of the motorcycle world. We'll trace the competitive spirit that led Suzuki to build it, the mechanics of how it achieved speeds once reserved for racetracks, and the cultural storm that followed when headlines screamed about a bike that could nearly outrun supercars. You'll hear how this motorcycle's reputation sparked what would later become known as the Gentleman's Agreement, a self-imposed industry truce that quietly capped speeds for the next 2 decades. And we'll look at the long-lasting impact of this decision, from how it reshaped motorcycle culture to the way it turned the Hayabusa into a living legend, revered by riders, feared by critics, and endlessly debated in garages, forums, and collector circles around the world. What makes this story so compelling is not just the raw speed or the record books, but the way one machine forced everyone, engineers, politicians, riders, and even casual observers, to reckon with the very concept of limits. Should technology be restrained for safety, or should it be allowed to go as far as human imagination can take it? That's the central question, and it's why the 1999 Hayabusa remains one of the most fascinating case studies in automotive history. By the end of our journey together, you'll see how a single motorcycle could embody both the thrill of progress and the anxieties that progress brings. So settle in, because we're about to follow the rise, the storm, and the legacy of the bike they tried to ban, the Suzuki Hayabusa. The story of the Hayabusa begins with a challenge, not from governments or newspapers, but from across the sea. In the late 1990s, Kawasaki had raised the bar with its Ninja ZX-11, a machine that dominated the high-speed crown for much of the decade. Suzuki saw an opportunity not only to dethrone its rival, but to do so in a way that would redefine what a production motorcycle could be. The result would not simply be another entry in the speed wars, but something designed to shock the world into paying attention. This is where our deep dive begins, because the Hayabusa wasn't born in a vacuum. It was forged in an environment where speed was the ultimate currency, and bragging rights could make or break a brand. Micro-story, rivalry in the air. In the mid-1990s, Kawasaki's Ninja ZX-11 was the undisputed king of top speed. Motorcycle magazines celebrated it as the world's fastest production bike, and riders around the globe lusted after its sleek lines and incredible performance. Suzuki, once a giant in the speed department, had been pushed into the shadows. For the company's engineers, it wasn't just about regaining status, it was about reminding the world that Suzuki could lead, not follow. The project that would eventually become the Hayabusa began as a focused mission: surpass the ZX-11, claim the crown, and leave no doubt who set the standard for speed. Context Digest. Japanese manufacturers in the 1990s weren't just competing against one another. They were competing against cultural expectations. Motorcycles had become symbols of national pride, and each new release was a statement of technical prowess. As the industry matured, the rivalry between Honda, Kawasaki, Yamaha, and Suzuki wasn't merely about profits. It was about proving who could embody the spirit of speed most completely. This backdrop made the stakes for Suzuki even higher. Micro-story, the Falcon's name. When it came time to name the bike, Suzuki's designers chose Hayabusa, the Japanese word for peregrine falcon. It wasn't just poetic flair. The peregrine falcon is known as the fastest bird on Earth, capable of diving at nearly 200 miles per hour. But there was another layer of symbolism. This falcon preys on blackbirds, which many fans interpreted as a direct jab at Kawasaki's ZX-11, nicknamed the Blackbird. In one stroke, Suzuki branded its motorcycle as not only the fastest, but also the natural predator of its biggest rival. Micro-story, a radical look. The Hayabusa's styling shocked audiences when it debuted. Its bulbous curves, teardrop profile, and unconventional fairing drew mixed reactions. Some called it beautiful, others found it ungainly, but there was a reason for every contour. Suzuki engineers had spent endless hours in wind tunnels, carving out a shape that minimized drag at ultra-high speeds. The radical look wasn't a fashion statement, it was aerodynamic necessity, a visual reminder that this was a machine built to dominate a very specific frontier, sheer velocity. Reflection bridge. With the mission set and the Falcon's identity firmly in place, Suzuki still had to prove it could deliver numbers that would silence critics. Context digest. Underneath the bodywork sat a 1290cc inline-4 engine that would become legendary. It wasn't just powerful, it was smooth, reliable, and engineered to handle punishing speeds without losing composure. Delivering 173 horsepower, it was enough to push the Hayabusa into territory no showroom bike had reached before. Beyond the raw figures, what made it remarkable was how accessible it felt. Riders described it as controllable, even docile, until you twisted the throttle and unleashed its full fury. That dual nature, the everyday ride hiding extraordinary performance, helped cement its reputation. Microstory, shattering the barrier. In testing, the Hayabusa stunned even seasoned journalists. One test rider recorded a verified top speed of 194 miles per hour. This wasn't a stripped-down race bike. It was a machine anyone could walk into a dealership and buy. Headlines erupted around the world, proclaiming the Hayabusa the fastest production motorcycle ever built. The impact was immediate. Suzuki had done it, and the era of the hyperbike had officially begun. Context digest. The motorcycle press played a pivotal role in amplifying the Hayabusa's reputation. Magazines and television programs were quick to highlight not only the record-breaking numbers, but also the sensation of riding a bike that felt as though it bent the laws of physics. For enthusiasts, this was validation of their passion. For skeptics, it was confirmation of their worst fears. The sheer visibility of the Hayabusa meant that conversations about speed were no longer confined to racing circuits. They were happening in living rooms, offices, and government halls. Microstory regulators. Take notice. As word of the Hayabusa spread, European transportation agencies grew uneasy. Reports of a motorcycle that could outrun sports cars triggered debates over safety and responsibility. Was it ethical to sell a machine capable of nearly 200 miles per hour to the general public? Politicians began floating the idea of bans or restrictions, and the pressure on manufacturers grew. Suzuki's triumph in engineering was about to become a political flashpoint. Reflection bridge. The Hayabusa's record-breaking success had inadvertently sparked a storm far larger than Suzuki anticipated. Microstory. The Gentleman's Whisper. In response to mounting scrutiny, the heads of Japan's major motorcycle makers began discussing a way to defuse the situation. The idea was simple. If they could quietly agree to cap future bikes at a lower speed, they might avoid harsher government intervention. Out of these hushed conversations would come one of the most unusual agreements in automotive history, a voluntary top speed limit of 186 miles per hour. Never formalized in writing but understood across the industry. Microstory, cultural explosion. Meanwhile, the Hayabusa was becoming an icon on the streets and in pop culture. It appeared in movies, music videos, and video games symbolizing speed and rebellion. Enthusiasts celebrated its audacity, customizing it with wild paint jobs, turbochargers, and extended swing arms for drag racing. The bike transcended its mechanical identity. It became a canvas for personal expression, a legend in real time. Microstory, the split audience. Not everyone was celebrating. Insurance companies flagged it as high risk. Lawmakers used it as an example of why tighter regulations were needed, and safety groups condemned it outright. This polarization only fed the mystique. To love the Hayabusa was to align yourself with freedom and power. To oppose it was to side with caution and restraint. Either way, the motorcycle kept everyone talking, and that sustained visibility guaranteed it wouldn't be forgotten. Context digest. The late 1990s and early 2000s marked a turning point in how society perceived motorcycles. No longer were they just leisure machines or commuter tools. They were cultural statements. The Hayabusa epitomized this shift, representing both the promise and the peril of unchecked performance. For Suzuki, it was a triumph, but it was also a lightning rod. forcing the industry to rethink its relationship with speed, responsibility, and public perception. The stage was now set for the next chapter, where the industry's quiet agreement and the Hayabusa's cultural resonance would collide in ways that reshaped motorcycling for decades to come. As the Hayabusa's reputation spread like wildfire, the motorcycle industry found itself standing at a crossroads. On one side was the triumph of Suzuki's engineering, a machine that had conquered the Blackbird and set a new frontier. On the other side was the looming shadow of regulation, especially in Europe, where policymakers viewed this ultra-fast machine as an unacceptable risk. What happened next was not a matter of technical capability, but of strategic survival, because if the manufacturers didn't act, governments surely would. Micro story, behind closed doors. In the year 2000, Japanese manufacturers came together to address the issue head-on. The meetings were discreet, informal, and rarely acknowledged in public. The conclusion was extraordinary. A voluntary cap of 300 kilometers per hour, or roughly 186 miles per hour, would be applied to all future production motorcycles. This gentleman's agreement was never codified in law, yet it carried the weight of authority across the entire industry. It was a truce designed not to limit progress, but to preserve freedom from external control. Context digest. The agreement was unprecedented in scope. 4 rival companies, Suzuki, Honda, Kawasaki, and Yamaha, aligned not because they wanted to, but because they feared the alternative. European governments had already signaled they were prepared to impose bans or restrictions on motorcycles capable of extreme speeds. By self-regulating, the companies could keep producing high-performance bikes without triggering outright prohibition. It was a compromise, but one that marked the end of an unrestrained era. Reflection bridge. For the Hayabusa, this moment transformed its identity from a single fast motorcycle into the symbol of the last uncapped frontier. Micro story, the last of its kind. Because it was released just before the agreement took effect, the 1999 Hayabusa remains unique. Later models were still blisteringly fast, but none could claim the same unshackled top speed. Enthusiasts quickly realized this and began treating the first-generation models as special, a snapshot of what was possible before the ceiling fell. Collectors now see the early Hayabusas as artifacts of freedom, the final machines to truly test the limits of production performance. Micro story, media panic. Around the same time, news outlets amplified the controversy. Stories appeared describing the Hayabusa as a two-wheeled missile and questioning whether ordinary roads should host such machines. This moral panic shaped public perception, painting the Hayabusa as more dangerous than it truly was in everyday use. Ironically, the coverage only heightened its allure, convincing enthusiasts that Suzuki had created something governments were desperate to contain. Context digest. Insurance companies also played a critical role. Premiums for Hayabusas surged, not necessarily because of higher accident data, but because of the perception of risk. Riders faced a financial reminder of the controversy every time they renewed coverage. In this way, the bike's cultural baggage translated into tangible costs, reinforcing its reputation as both a marvel and a liability. Micro story like global ripples. The agreement didn't just affect Japan. European brands and even smaller manufacturers worldwide recognized the precedent and followed suit. A new ceiling had been set, and the international motorcycle industry adjusted its designs accordingly. Performance figures still impressed, but the psychological barrier of 200 miles per hour remained untouched for years. The Hayabusa stood alone in memory as the one that got there first. Reflection bridge. Yet while restrictions were tightening on paper, in the real world a counterculture was blossoming around the Hayabusa. Micro story, the custom revolution. Riders quickly discovered that the Hayabusa's engine was remarkably tunable. Shops began adding turbochargers and nitrous systems, pushing the bike far beyond factory limits. It became the weapon of choice for drag racing, where extended swing arms and massive rear tires turned it into a straight-line monster. These custom builds proved that the spirit of speed couldn't be contained, even if manufacturers had agreed to play nice. Micro story, pop culture icon, Hollywood and video games took notice. The Hayabusa appeared in blockbuster films, symbolizing untouchable speed, and it was immortalized in racing simulators that allowed players to virtually experience its performance. For a generation of enthusiasts, Their first exposure to the Hayabusa wasn't in a showroom but on a screen. This digital fame ensured its legacy reached far beyond hardcore riders. Context Digest. The turn of the millennium was a transformative time for motorcycle culture. Online forums were exploding, connecting enthusiasts across borders. The Hayabusa became a common reference point, a shared fascination that united riders in debates about performance, safety, and freedom. It was no longer just a motorcycle. It was a cultural touchstone, shaping how people talked about speed itself. Microstory: the double-edged sword. While enthusiasts celebrated the Hayabusa, safety groups doubled down on criticism. They pointed to accidents involving sport bikes even when other models were involved, and used the Hayabusa as a shorthand for recklessness. This unfair association added tension to every public debate, keeping the motorcycle in headlines long after its debut. The Hayabusa had become larger than life, both admired and vilified. Microstory: legacy under fire. By the mid-2000s, the Hayabusa had settled into an unusual position. It was no longer the absolute fastest bike on paper. Rivals had caught up within the limits of the agreement, but it still carried the aura of the original record breaker. That aura proved powerful, keeping sales strong and giving Suzuki an enduring flagship. Even so, every new Hayabusa release was measured against the legend of 1999, a standard that could never be fully surpassed. Reflection Bridge. With its legend secure and its controversy enduring, the Hayabusa's story was far from over. Because what followed was not just about speed, but about legacy. How this motorcycle would shape culture, industry, and memory for decades to come. The later years of the Hayabusa story reveal not only how the motorcycle aged, but how it cemented its position as one of the most important two-wheeled machines in history. As the industry evolved, regulations tightened further, and new technologies emerged. The Hayabusa carried a weight few bikes could match. It was the living reminder of a moment when performance knew no boundaries. This enduring status gave it influence far beyond the showroom floor, shaping entire communities and even redefining how motorcycles were perceived. Microstory: the 2008 resurrection. Nearly a decade after its debut, Suzuki unveiled a redesigned Hayabusa. The engine was enlarged to 1,340cc, and refinements in electronics made it smoother, more responsive, and more comfortable for long rides. Yet despite the upgrades, the voluntary top speed agreement remained, meaning the new version couldn't eclipse the original's record. For enthusiasts, this created a paradox. The second-generation Hayabusa was objectively a better motorcycle, but it could never be as legendary as its uncapped predecessor. Microstory: the rider's perspective. Owners of the Hayabusa often describe a unique bond with the machine. It isn't just the speed, it's the confidence the bike inspires. The aerodynamic bodywork keeps it stable at high velocity, the engine delivers effortless thrust at any speed, and the ergonomics allow long-distance comfort. For many riders, the Hayabusa became more than a sport bike. It was a grand touring missile, capable of devouring highways while still thrilling on twisty roads. This dual identity helped it outlast rivals and win loyalty that bordered on devotion. Context Digest. By the 2010s, motorcycle culture had diversified dramatically. Adventure bikes, naked sport machines, and retro-styled models gained popularity, yet the Hayabusa maintained a niche as the benchmark for extreme performance. Its staying power highlighted a deeper truth. While trends shifted, the allure of ultimate speed never disappeared. Even as the market broadened, the Hayabusa held a symbolic place that no other category could dislodge. Microstory: the global brotherhood. Online communities dedicated to the Hayabusa grew into vast networks. Riders from different countries shared tuning tips, stories, and photos, creating an international family united by the bird of prey emblem. Annual meetups, drag racing events, and charity rides reinforced the sense of belonging. For many, owning a Hayabusa wasn't just about personal enjoyment, it was about joining a tribe that celebrated the thrill of riding a machine that once changed the rules. Reflection Bridge. While riders cherished it, regulators and environmental trends were setting the stage for the next challenges. Microstory: the pressure of emissions. As global emission standards became stricter, performance motorcycles faced mounting hurdles. The Hayabusa's large displacement and raw power drew scrutiny, and by the late 2010s, rumors swirled about its discontinuation. In Europe, stricter regulations made it increasingly difficult to keep the model compliant. For fans, the thought of losing the Hayabusa was almost unthinkable, sparking petitions and campaigns to keep it alive. Micro story: the pause and return. In 2020, Suzuki officially halted production in many markets due to emissions regulations. For a moment, it seemed the Hayabusa had reached the end of its road. Yet just a year later, Suzuki announced a heavily updated third generation. While its top speed was still electronically limited, the new Hayabusa featured advanced electronics, refined aerodynamics, and safety features like traction control and ABS. The message was clear: the Falcon would continue to fly, even in a more regulated era. Context Digest. The 2021 relaunch showed how far motorcycle technology had advanced. Rider aids once reserved for race bikes were now standard, and the Hayabusa balanced heritage with modernity. Still, the shadow of the original remained. No matter how advanced the electronics or refined the handling, enthusiasts continued to measure every new version against the groundbreaking 1999 model that defied convention. Microstory: the collector's market. As time passed, first-generation Hayabusas began commanding attention from collectors. Unmodified examples, especially from the inaugural 1999 run, fetched rising prices at auctions. These bikes were recognized not just as machines, but as cultural artifacts, tangible links to a time when limits were shattered. For collectors, owning one was like holding a piece of history, a relic from the moment motorcycling crossed into new territory. Microstory: the cultural stamp. The Hayabusa's name has transcended motorcycling. It appears in music, film, and even slang as shorthand for overwhelming speed. Few vehicles achieve this kind of cultural recognition. The Hayabusa stands alongside icons like the Mustang or the Porsche 911 in terms of symbolic power. Its image resonates with people who may never even ride a motorcycle, proving its impact is broader than just two wheels. Reflection bridge. As we step back to assess the full story, it becomes clear that the Hayabusa is not only about speed, but about what speed represents to humanity. Microstory. The symbol of limits. Every era has its machines that test boundaries. The Concorde in aviation, the Saturn V in space exploration, and in motorcycling, the Hayabusa. These creations don't just achieve technical feats. They force societies to grapple with questions of ambition, safety, and responsibility. The Hayabusa's legacy lies in being that pivot point for motorcycles, the moment when the thrill of possibility met the reality of human fear. Context Digest. Decades later, the Hayabusa still carries that dual legacy. It remains a living model in Suzuki's lineup, yet it also lives as myth, remembered as the motorcycle that forced an entire industry to self-regulate. Riders revere it for its capability. Critics invoke it as a cautionary tale. The tension has never been resolved, and perhaps that's why the Hayabusa endures. It embodies the conflict between what we can do and what we should do. Microstory: a legend that outran time. Though competitors have matched or even surpassed its performance within modern constraints, none have matched its mystique. The Hayabusa was more than numbers. It was a cultural event. Its story bridges generations of riders and continues to inspire debates about speed, freedom, and responsibility. Long after production eventually ceases, the Hayabusa will remain a symbol, etched into the collective memory of enthusiasts worldwide. And so the tale of the bike they tried to ban concludes not with silence but with resonance, proving that sometimes the most controversial creations are the ones that leave the deepest mark. The journey of the Hayabusa is unlike any other in motorcycling, because it was never just about horsepower or aerodynamics. It was about what happens when technology collides with human imagination. From its explosive debut in 1999, when it stormed past the competition and redefined speed, to the uneasy truce that followed with the gentleman's agreement, to its evolution into a cultural and collector's icon, the Hayabusa has carried a story far larger than its steel and plastic bodywork. It became a mirror of society's hopes and fears, proof that one machine could inspire exhilaration, anxiety, admiration, and controversy all at once. Looking back, the first Hayabusa represents more than a motorcycle. It represents a moment in time when engineers asked how far they could go and dared to find out. The reactions it triggered, from awestruck riders to alarmed regulators, show us the power of machines to shape conversations far beyond their technical specifications. Later generations refined the package and brought it into modern compliance. But the shadow of that first uncapped Falcon will always loom over the model. It is remembered as the last time motorcycling's boundaries were shattered without restraint, and that is why its name endures. The cultural impact of the Hayabusa has proven just as enduring as its performance. It has become shorthand for unmatched speed, referenced in films, music, games, and everyday slang. It created communities that thrive to this day, from custom builders to drag racers to collectors who guard pristine early models like artifacts. Few motorcycles achieve this level of immortality, and fewer still manage to embody both technological brilliance and societal controversy so completely. So what is the lasting lesson of the Hayabusa? That innovation and restraint are forever intertwined. That when humans create something extraordinary, we also must wrestle with what it means to use it responsibly. And that sometimes the very act of pushing too far is what creates legends. The Hayabusa forced an entire industry to pause, reflect, and compromise, but it also gave riders a machine that made them feel truly limitless, if only for a moment. Thanks for riding with us on Cam and Crank. See you next time, automotive enthusiasts.